Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of the Idiot Book Nook. My name is Blazewing, and my pronouns are she, her, and they, them.
I am the Reading Dragon, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Lady Punnet, and my pronouns are primarily she, her, sometimes they, them. Today it's she, her.
And we are bringing to you the Amulet of Samarkand, the first book in the Bartimaeus Trilogy, and we are going to be doing chapter 18 today. But before we get into that, if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can do so at linktr.ee/Idiot Book Nook. You'll be able to find my links, the Reading Dragon links, and Lady Punnet's links, as well as our website and all of our podcast feeds. They're all listed there. And if you'd like to leave us a voice message under our podcast feeds, go look for Anchor. And you can leave us a voice message on Anchor, and we would love to be able to do a listener feedback episode. With that being said, welcome to episode 34 of the Idiot Book Nook. Narrator, would you please? Also, if I have to leave suddenly, it's because I have food at the door.
Yep. The Bartimaeus Trilogy, Book 1, The Amulet of Samarkand, by Jonathan Stroud. Narrated by the Reading Dragon. Voice acted by the Reading Dragon, Blazewing 2010, and Lady Punnet. Chapter 18. Nathaniel. The 2 days following his naming were uncomfortable ones for Nathaniel. Physically, he was at a low ebb. The summoning of Bartimaeus and their magical duel had seen to that. By the time he arrived back from his trip to the Thames, he was already sniffling slightly. At nightfall, he was snuffling like a hog, and by the following morning he had a full-blown taps running head cold. When he appeared wraith-like in her kitchen, Mrs. Underwood took one look at him, spun him on his heels, and sent him back to bed. She followed him up shortly afterward with a hot water bottle, a pile of chocolate spread sandwiches, and a steaming mug of honey and lemon. From the depths of his blankets, Nathaniel coughed his thanks.
Don't mention it, John,
she said.
I don't want to hear another peep out of you this morning. We have to get you better for the state address, don't we?
She glanced around the room, frowning.
There's a very strong smell of candles up here.
She said.
And incense. You haven't been practicing here, have you?
No, Mrs. Underwood.
Inwardly, Nathaniel cursed his carelessness. He had been meaning to open the window to let the stench out, but he had felt so wary the evening before, it slipped his mind.
That happens sometimes. Smells rise to the top of the house from Mr. Underwood's workroom.
Odd. I've never noticed it before.
She sniffed again. Nathaniel's eyes drawn as if by a magnet to one edge of his rug, where to his horror he saw the perimeter of an incriminating pentacle. Where to his horror he saw the perimeter of an incriminating pentacle peeping out. With a great effort of will, he tore his gaze away and broke into a vigorous fit of coughing. Mrs. Underwood was distracted. She passed him the honey and lemon.
Drink that, dear, then sleep,
she said.
I'll come up again at lunch. I'll come up again at lunchtime.
Long before she did so, the window had been opened, and the room well and truly aired. The floorboards beneath the rug had been scrubbed clean. Nathaniel lay in bed. He knew his name, which Mrs. Underwood had seemed determined to break in for him, rang strangely in his ears. It sounded fake, even a little foolish. John Mandrake. Appropriate, perhaps, for a magician from the history books, less so for a dribbly, cold-ridden boy. He would find it hard to get used to this new identity. Harder still to forget his old name. Not that he'd be allowed to forget it, with Bartimaeus around. Even with his safeguard, the tobacco tin, washing about at the bottom of the river, Nathaniel did not feel quite secure. Try as he might to eject it from his mind, the anxiety came back. It was like a guilty conscience, prodding him, reminding him, never letting him rest easy. Maybe he had forgotten something vital that the demon would spot. Maybe, even now, it was hatching its plan, instead of spying on Lovelace as he had directed. A multitude of unpleasant possibilities spun endlessly through his mind as he sprawled amid the debris of orange peels and crumpled tissues. He was sorely tempted to brain out the scrying glass from its hiding place under the roof tiles, and with its help check on Bartimaeus. But he knew this was unwise. His head was fogged, his voice a feeble croak, and his body didn't have enough strength to sit upright, let alone control a small, belligerent imp. For the moment, the genie would have to be left to its own dubious devices. All would no doubt be well. About that.
It's his fault. He jinxed
Yep.
it.
Yep. Mrs. Underwood's attentions saw Nathaniel back to his feet by the third morning.
And not a moment too soon.
She said.
It's our big outing this evening.
Who'll be there?
Nathaniel asked. He was sitting cross-legged in the corner of the kitchen, polishing his shoes.
300 ministers of the government, their husbands and wives, some very lucky named apprentices, and a few hanger-ons, the lesser magicians, from the civil service or military, or who are close to being promoted, but don't yet know the right people. It's a good opportunity to see who's in and who's out, John, not to mention what everyone's wearing. At the summer gatherings in June, several of the female ministers experiment with craftons in the Samarkand style. It caused quite a stir, but it didn't catch on, of course. Oh, please concentrate, John.
He had dropped his brush.
Sorry, it slipped, that's all. Why Samarkand, Mrs. Underwood? What's so trendy about it?
I sure haven't the faintest idea. If you finished with your shoes, you'd better get on with brushing your jacket.
It was a Saturday, and there were no lessons to distract Nathaniel from the thrill of what was to come. So as the day wore on, he became possessed by a wildly mounting excitement. By 3 o'clock, several hours before it was necessary, he was already dressed in his best clothes and prowling back and forth about the house. A state of affairs that continued until his master put his head out of his bedroom and abruptly ordered him to stop.
Cease your tramping, boy. You're making my head throb. Or would you prefer to remain behind this evening?
Nathaniel shook his head numbly and descended on tiptoe to the library, where he kept himself out of trouble researching new constraining spells for middle-ranking djinn. Time passed agreeably, and he was still busy learning the difficult incantation for the jagged pendulum, where Mr. Underwood strode into the room, his best overcoat flowing behind him. That was meant to be when. When Mr. Underwood strode into the room, his best overcoat flowing behind him.
There you are, you idiot! I've been calling for you up and down the house. Another minute and you'd have found us gone. Sorry, sir. I was reading. Not that book you weren't, you dozy fool. It's a 4th level written in Coptic. You'd never have a hope. You were asleep and don't deny it. Right, snap to sharpish, or I really will leave you behind.
Vapid bitch. Nathaniel's eyes had been closed at the moment his master walked in. He found it easier to memorize things that way. All things considered, this was perhaps fortunate, since he didn't have to come up with any further explanations. In an instant, the book was lying discarded on the chair, and he was out of the library at his master's heels and following him in a heart-pounding flurry down the hall, through the front door and out into the night, where Mrs. Underwood, in a shiny green dress and with something like a furry anaconda wound loosely around her neck, waited smiling beside the big black car. Nathaniel had only been in his master's car once before, and he did not remember it. He climbed into the back, marveling at the feel of the shiny leather seat and the odd fake smell of the pine tree odorizer dangling from the rear view mirror.
Sit back and don't touch the windows.
Mr. Underwood's eyebrows glowered at him in the mirror. Nathaniel sat back, his hands contentedly in his lap, and the journey to Parliament began. Nathaniel stared out of the window as the car cruised south. The countless glowing lights of London, headlamps, street lamps, shop fronts, windows, vigilant spheres, flashed in quick succession across his face. He gazed wide-eyed, blinking hardly at all, drinking everything in. Traveling across the city was a special occasion in itself. It rarely happened to Nathaniel, whose experience of the world was confined mainly to books. Now and then, Mrs. Underwood took him on necessary bus trips to clothes and shoe stores, and once, when Mr. Underwood was away on business, he had been taken to the zoo. But he had seldom gone beyond the outskirts of Highgate, and certainly never at night. As usual, it was the sheer scale that took his breath away. The profusion of streets and side roads, the ribbons of lights curving off on all sides. Most of the houses seemed very different from the ones in his master's street. Much smaller, meaner, more tightly packed. Often they seemed to congregate around large windowless buildings with flat roofs and tall chimneys. Presumably, factories were commoners assembled for some dull purpose. As such, they didn't really interest him. The commoners themselves were in evidence, too. Nathaniel was always amazed by how many of them there were. Despite the dark and the evening drizzle, they were out in uprising numbers, heads down, hurrying along like ants in his garden, ducking in and out of shops, or, sometimes, disappearing into ramshackle inns on street corners. They were where warm orange light shone through frosted windows. Every house like this had its own vigilance sphere, floating prominently in the air above the door. Whenever someone walked below, it bobbed and pulsed with a deeper red. The car had just passed one of these inns, a particularly large example opposite a subway station, when Mr. Underwood banged his fist down on the dashboard hard enough to make Nathaniel jump.
"That's one, Martha!"
he exclaimed.
"That's one of the worst of them! If it was up to me, the night police would move in tomorrow and carry off everyone they found inside."
Oh,
wait.
not the night police, Arthur.
His wife said, in a pained voice.
Surely there are better ways of re-educating them.
You don't know what you're talking about, Martha. Show me a London inn, and I'll show you a commoners' meeting house hidden inside. In the attic, in the cellar, in the secret room behind the bar. I've seen it all. Internal Affairs has raided them often enough, but there's never any evidence, and none of the goods we're after, just empty rooms. A few chairs and tables. Take it from me, it's filthy dives and pits like that where all this trouble's starting. The PM will have to act soon enough, but by then who knows what kind of outrage they'll have committed. Vigilance spheres aren't enough. We need to burn the places to the ground. That's what I told Duval this afternoon, but of course, no one listens to me.
Nathaniel had learned long ago never to ask questions, no matter how interested he was in something. He craned his head and watched the orange lights of the inn dwindle and vanish behind them. Now they were entering central London, where the buildings became even bigger and more grand, as befitted the capital of the empire. The number of private cars on the roads increased, while the shop fronts grew wide and gaudy, and magicians, as well as commoners, became visible strolling on the pavements.
How are you doing back there, dear?
Mrs. Underwood asked.
Very well, Mrs. Underwood. Are we nearly there yet?
Another couple of minutes, John.
His master took a glance in the rear-view mirror.
Time enough, then, to give you a warning,
he said.
Tonight, you're representing me. We're going to be in the same room as all the major magicians in the country, and that means men and women whose power you can't even begin to guess at. Put a foot out of line, and it'll ruin my reputation. Do you know what happened to Disraeli's apprentice? No, sir. It was a state address much like this one. The apprentice tripped on the Westminster steps while Disraeli was being introduced to the assembly. He knocked against his master and sent him tumbling head over heels down the stairs. Disraeli's fall was broken by the Duchess of Argyll, fortunately a well-padded lady. Yes, sir. Disraeli stood up and apologized to the Duchess with great courtesy. Then he turned to where his apprentice was trembling and weeping at the top of the steps and clapped his hands. The apprentice fell to his knees, his hands outstretched, but to no avail. A darkness fell across the hall for approximately 15 seconds, and when it cleared, the apprentice had gone, and in his place was a solid iron statue, in exactly the wretched boy's shape. In its supplicating hands was a boot scraper, on which everyone entering the hall for the last 150 years has been able to clean their shoes. Really, sir? Will I see it? The point being, boy, that if you embarrass me in any way, I shall ensure that there's a matching hat stand there, too. Do you understand? I do indeed, sir.
Nathaniel made a mental note to check the formula for petrification. He had a feeling it involved summoning an Afrit of considerable power. From what he knew of his master's ability, he doubted he would have the slightest chance of accomplishing this. He smiled slightly in the darkness.
Stay beside me at all times,
Mr. Underwood went on.
Do not speak unless I give you leave, and do not stare at any of the magicians, no matter what deformities they may possess. And now, be quiet. We're there, and I need to concentrate.
Mr. Stroud, thank you for writing Mr. Underwood as such a detestable character.
Yeah, we have issues with Mr. Underwood, but, I mean, we're trying to do it justice, and at the same time, there's at least one of us here who has a, shall we say, an Umbridge-type hatred for Underwood.
I would like to point out, though, that Underwood, playing devil's advocate, Underwood has a reason to be concerned with Nathaniel's
yes,
attitude because of what happened last time.
Yeah, but that's still his fault to begin with.
We'll get there.
We'll discuss that in the discussion portion of this video.
The car slowed. It joined a procession of similar black vehicles that moved along the broad gray span of Whitewall. They passed a succession of granite monuments to the conquering magicians, to the late Victorian age, and the fallen heroes of the Great War. Then, a few monolithic sculptures representing ideal virtues: patriotism, respect for authority, the dutiful wife. Behind soared the flat-fronted, many-windowed office towers that housed the imperial government. The pace slowed to a crawl. Nathaniel began to notice groups of silent onlookers standing on the sidewalks, watching the cars go by. As best he could judge, their mood seemed sullen, even hostile. Most of the faces were thin and drawn. Large men in gray uniforms stood casually further off, keeping an eye on the crowds. Everyone, policemen and commoners alike, looked very cold. Sitting by himself in the insulated comfort of the car, a glow of self-satisfaction began to steal over Nathaniel. He was part of things now. He was an insider on his way to Parliament at last. He was important, set apart from the rest. And it felt good. For the first time in his life, he knew the lazy exhilaration of easy power. Presently, the car entered Parliament Square, and they turned left through some wrought-iron gates. Mr. Underwood flashed a pass. Someone signaled them to go on. Then the car was crossing a cobbled yard and descending a ramp into an underground car park lit by neon strip lights. Mr. Underwood pulled into a free bay and switched off the ignition. In the back, Nathaniel's fingers dug into the leather seat. He was shaking with suppressed excitement. They had arrived.
And thus ends Chapter 18 of the Amulet of Samarkand. Now begins our discussion portion.
Nugget is judging
Fuck
the
you,
car
Underwood!
Sorry. Nugget is judging the car ride.
Yep.
Look at that face. Okay, for those listening to the podcast, I shall now do a description of my cat's face during that whole portion of the car ride. His eyes are closed. He is sitting very comfortably, but his face certainly has the look of someone who is deeply unimpressed with the world.
In other words, he agrees with my sentiment of "fuck you, Underwood."
No, it was mainly about the car ride because Nugget does not like car rides.
Fair enough.
So, Nathaniel has achieved something that he has been wanting to do since he was very young. Set foot in Parliament, or he is about to, because he hasn't actually done it yet. We haven't quite gotten there. And all I can sit here and think is, how's he going to fuck this up?
Yep.
Underwood threatened to turn him into a hat rack.
I don't think he's tall enough to be turned into a hat rack.
I mean, he has enough mass to do so.
We don't know.
He could be stretched like putty.
Could be.
That being said, Underwood is a weak man.
So with that, you are absolutely right, because in my notes I have literally just fuck Underwood. I have issues with Underwood, serious issues. Dude's got, I don't know what, but dude, you're gonna need to like seek therapy or something. Fix yourself.
He's the bastard child of Dursley and Umbridge.
Wait, what if he's a result of generational trauma?
Oh.
Think about it. His lessons are probably based heavily on what his master taught him.
So, generational trauma, I'm starting to get, wasn't an idea when this book was written. What is the print date of this book, just out of curiosity, in the publishing info? Should be in the front, first couple of pages, yeah, usually.
It's usually with the publication date and stuff.
Yeah.
Let me take a look.
Like the first page or so that has like the publisher on it.
Survey says...
Copyright 2003. Let's see here. Was this 2003?
So this book actually came out after Harry Potter did.
Huh.
Let me do a quick Google search. One moment.
Yeah, just to double check.
I am doing it. I got this.
You got it? Okay.
I'm looking it up now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know.
So we're looking up the public when it was first.
When it was first released, when it was first published or released.
Okay, so the Amulet of Samarkand was first published September 30th, 2003.
So this book came out after Harry Potter.
Damn.
Fascinating. I love it.
I don't think generational trauma was discussed in depth until like
that.
I want to say like the last couple of years.
Yeah, within the last couple of years, but before that. But you are absolutely right. That doesn't mean that it's not there and that he couldn't be kind of a result of it. Just we didn't have words to put. We didn't have a way to put it into words, right? We didn't really understand that stuff like that can pass through generations. I mean, yeah, we had kind of an inkling, but we didn't have a description for it.
Yeah.
But now I'm just thinking like, I don't think we're gonna. Here's my prediction. I don't think Underwood's gonna make it past the first book. If anything, he might be mentioned in the next ones, like, oh, yeah, my professor or teacher, whatever. But here's the thing: if Underwood's teacher was anything like how Underwood is treating Nathaniel, then there's a very, very good chance, and I am not trying to redeem him, I am not making excuses for him, I am looking for a reason on why he is such a shit-ass teacher, because here's the thing, we don't know how... Yes. If his teacher treated him the same way he's treating Nathaniel, it would explain where his teaching style comes from. Yep. Because how we treat others is often shown to us by our parents.
Yep.
So if the man went through half of the shit that Nathaniel's gone through...
Going on that theory, what if his behavior towards Nathaniel is the result of doing the opposite thing that his teacher did for him? Because when you think about it, when it comes to how people treat others based on how they were treated by their parents,
yep,
it can be because of what they learned as to what not to do from their parents. For example, I'm going to use myself as an example here. Both of my parents, my mother was very neglectful. My father was a sociopathic psycho. And for me, what resulted from me when when the abuse and the neglect was being put onto me, I learned that I did not want to be treating people like that. All I wanted was to be loved and cared for. And so what ended up happening was, well, you guys know me outside of this, and you guys would know that I try my best to be there for those that I care about and help out those that need it if I'm capable of doing that. So that's kind of the result of learning from my parents. Now another example, probably a better way of explaining it. Take two children growing up in the same household, and both children dealing with the same behaviors of their parents. Their parents might be like heavy drug users or something like that. One child might actually end up being a drug user like the parents, while the other child might be like, no, this is bad, we shouldn't do this, and end up being super clean and strict on health and trying to make it so that way he or she doesn't end up like the parents at all.
Fair.
Yeah. I think if we're going off of this theory of generational trauma, and if we go with this continued theory that he's doing the opposite of what his master did, I think the first time then that Underwood probably saw a demon was probably when he summoned one for the first time.
Probably.
I'd also like to point out that the next generation usually takes lessons that they've learned from their parents on how not to do things, because each generation has been known to pass on certain traumas, whether it is intentional or not, to the next generation as they are raising them. And they use that in going forward and teaching the next generation how to do things. Sure, they fix the problems, but it brings up a whole host of other problems a lot of the times.
Yep. Like for me, my mother, being neglectful, she was also an animal hoarder.
Yep.
And that taught me never to have more than one pet at a time.
Yep.
Unless I can afford it with, financially afford to do so, and have the time and energy to afford that kind of care for more than one creature.
Yep.
I'm not going to have any more than one pet. As you guys can see, I have not gotten another pet after my dear princess passed on.
Yep.
One,
Yeah, but
because
that's
I'm
also
not
happened recently, hon. You can't be expected to move on that quickly.
This being said, not only do I not have the, not only am I not ready for it because of timing, I don't have the funds because the funds that I was utilizing to take care of my dear is now having to be used for rent because the rent in my current place has gone up by $300 American.
So Jay says, apparently you just described their life.
Yep. I am sorry to bop that on the nose. However,
On a slightly more lighthearted note, as I was looking at the different tag things in the Amulet of Samarkand, the Bartimaeus series is to be adapted into a movie.
Sorry, what?
According to this article, which was updated in 2019, the Bartimaeus series is to be adapted to a movie.
Nice.
And if I'm just looking through it because I'm trying to avoid spoilers. They have a quote from Stroud.
Oh, do tell. What is it?
Genies have a habit of reappearing when you least suspect it, and I'm thrilled that the Bartimaeus movie's adaptation is back on track. Ever since he first materialized 16 years ago, I've had fans asking for updates on the film. So I'm delighted to be working with Michael May here and the Start Media team, and I have great confidence in their vision for this project. I look forward to working closely with them to bring Bart's adventures to the big screen very soon, as reported by the bookseller.
I love how he's nicknamed Bart.
Oh.
Wait, I need a link. Please send a link. Please.
Okay. This is from the Times of India.
So drop it in the chat. We'll take a look at that. And then drop it in the Discord, and I will see about adding that to the website.
Okay, 1 second.
I'm gonna have to make a note here. Give me 1 second. I'll look at doing that today once we end.
And I will drop it in our general chat.
Yep, and then in the Twitch chat here. I did have one other thought. Just one other thought. How many chapters do we have? So this book has 44 chapters altogether.
We're almost halfway through.
Yep. The other thought that I had, they mentioned clothing in the Samarkand style. All we've heard about that is an amulet. We don't know what the Samarkand style is. I'm assuming it's probably a type of pattern or the way things are made.
Probably the way that clothing is worn.
I want to say maybe it's has an... But Samarkand seems to have an East Indian, almost Egyptian sounding type thing.
Well, let's look this up. Hold on.
Oh, careful, because you might get into spoilers.
Yeah, don't do spoilers, but if you're looking up to see if it's an actual location, go for it.
Yeah.
And I just posted it in the chat.
I see that. Thank you.
Bearing in mind that this article is from 2019.
Okay.
And I'm going to look at the month because, as we know, what happened in the 2019?
Yep.
June 2019.
So, coming out of the pandemic, as we will be hopefully soon, but with things opening back up now, there are hopes that maybe this will get back underway?
Maybe.
That's what it sounds like.
So, first off, Samarkand is a city in Uzbekistan.
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 Okay, so it's a style then. It is a cultural style.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's really pretty.
Interesting. Okay. Well, on that note, we should probably wrap this episode up.
Ooh.
What?
Oh, I'm just looking at more of the images of Samarkand style clothing.
Look that up over break. On that note, we should probably wrap this episode up. And we're going to take a 15-minute break. Actually, probably closer to 20 minutes. We'll come back top of the hour, guys, for episode 34 of the Idiot Book Nook and chapter 18 of the Amulet of Samarkand. Thank you for joining us if you are listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube channel. We hope you have enjoyed what we have brought you. I'm Blazewing.
I'm the Reading Dragon.
I'm Lady Punnet.
And we'll see you for episode 35. Coming up...
Blaze, what'd you do this time?
I didn't do nothing. I can't help the sirens. We'll see you in episode 35. If you are watching the Twitch stream, we'll be back in about, we'll be back top of the hour. If you're listening to the podcast, we will see you next episode. Oh, and don't forget to follow us on socials. lanktr.ee/Idiot Book Nook. You can find all of our links there. See you soon.